Hello again. This is Matt Stanford of Madison Grace Podcast. Welcome back. And as always, I'm with Maddie Stiers. How are you today, Maddie?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I have been looking forward to this topic that you came up with this idea, which is something that we deal with every day, the idea of holistic wellness, which really may be two words that people don't even understand what those mean. But I think it's important that we talk about this because it really is kind of a different way of thinking about wellness and thinking about mental health in general. So, what do we mean when we say holistic wellness? When we say holistic, we're thinking about taking the whole person into account when we're dealing with a mental health problem or a physical health problem or whatever that may be. And so, when I say whole person, what do I mean? So, for us here at the Open Healing Center, we think of people kind of having multiple facets to their being. So, we think of someone having a body, we think of them having a mind. We also think about them having a spirit and then also relationships. And so we get that from a number of scriptures, but maybe more specifically, Luke 2:52 says, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. So it talks about kind of four aspects of the developing Christ. And we also see that in other verses, like in Mark, where Jesus talks about to love the Lord your God with all your heart and mind and spirit and strength and your neighbor as yourself. So we see physical and non-physical aspects of our being. We see relationships with individuals outside of us. But as mental health care providers, we know that when a person's struggling with a mental health issue, it affects them at all levels. Even when a person is struggling with a physical health issue, it really affects them at all levels. And so when we engage a person or we need to set up a treatment plan or work with a person, regardless of what we're working with them about, we need to think about engaging them at all of those levels: physical, mental, spiritual, and relational. And in one sense, I'd like to talk first a little bit about, what happens if you don't do that. And I think a lot of times that's how people kind of perceive what treatment is really about. And a lot of times it is. So, someone with a mental health problem may go to a psychiatrist and get some medication because that's what psychiatrists use to treat mental health problems is medication. That's fantastic if needed. But that's all they do. They don't get any therapy. They don't change their lifestyle to make it more healthy. They don't have support around them. And so they're only getting an intervention at one level of their being, which means that really their recovery, their improvement is going to be very narrow as a result. Doesn't mean they won't have some, but it could be more broad and deeper. And so here at the Hope and Healing Center, we always try to engage everyone at those kind of four levels during their treatment. But that's really kind of what we're talking about. When we talk about holistic wellness, we're talking about engaging all the aspects of an individual and trying to move them towards kind of more wholeness in the context of being well, so that they'll be physically well, mentally well, spiritually well, and relationally well. And so we thought today we'd talk a little bit about all of those different aspects of our being. Do you have any thoughts on that, Maddie, before we kind of jump in?
Yeah, I think, excuse me. I think that that's actually a misconception that a lot of people have about mental health care is that, they think of their physical health and their mental health and their relationships and their spiritual well-being as separate areas of their life. And so they may think about therapy or mental health care as like, really, I'm just going to go in and talk about why I'm sad or, this issue that I'm struggling with, when in reality, a lot of providers are going to be talking to you about all of these different areas. And because they really do, as we'll talk about more today, connect. And if one area is struggling, oftentimes you'll see that kind of trickle down effect into the other areas as well.
Right. And all of those areas affect one another. And I think, that's the point. I mean, if you just ignore them, you just act like they're not there, that doesn't make them go away. So it really, a lot of this kind of, for me, at least from a physical needs perspective, became pretty apparent to me when I kind of started to work with individuals with mental health problems. And people would come in and, one of the first questions we ask individuals is, what's your primary complaint? What's your biggest concern? What would you like to change if you could change something? And people would come in with very serious mental health problems: schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, serious depression. And I cannot tell you how many people, the primary complaint that they had when they're struggling with delusions and breakdown in relationships and all of these different things, time and time and time again, the number one complaint was, I'm not sleeping well. It
Mm-hmm.
really it almost became laughable at some point. And in a curriculum that we developed, that's why sleeping well is the number one thing in there. It's the very first thing in the book. And a person with a mental health problem may not sleep well because of the medication they're taking, or they may not sleep well as a result of the mental health problem that they have. It may be a symptom of that. But when a person doesn't sleep well, it alters all types of things. It alters their brain chemistry, which causes them to be more irritable. It causes them to be fatigued, which causes them to be more stressed and irritable, to have more anxiety, potential to blow up, to be angry. I mean, there's all kinds, their performance is impacted. There's all kinds of effects with that. And so helping a person sleep better makes a huge difference in their mental health, but also in their physical health. We know good sleep is related to not gaining as much weight. I mean, there's all kinds of things that affects. And so, that just kind of really brought it home for me, was this idea that, here's this people with very serious mental health problems, and they're asking to have help with their sleep. And so, at the Hope of Healing Center, when we're working with somebody, we kind of look at what we think of as kind of primary physical needs. So we will work with a client, and I think this should be common in all mental health treatment. So you're dealing with sleep. You're helping those individuals evaluate their medication, because I think medication is the most obvious of the physical aspects of mental health treatment. You're trying to cause an individual's neurochemistry to be normalized. We also talk about diet. Individuals, in this culture we're in right now, people don't eat very well. We have an epidemic of obesity, and the reality is when you're taking psychiatric medications, you have a tendency to gain weight as a result of those. When you're, depressed and you isolate yourself, you don't move around as much. I mean, you're going to have a tendency to gain weight. And so being healthy is going to make your mental health, physically healthy. It's going to make your mental health better. And being physically healthy is going to help you with a lot of other things as well. And so, we also talk to them about exercise and being more active. And so we have a whole aspect related to the treatment of people with serious mental health problems that's just about their physical health. Oftentimes, it's a good idea for someone with a mental health problem, and when they begin treatment, to go and get a physical to make sure that they don't have some kind of physical problem like a thyroid issue or something else that could be mimicking a mental health problem. Or they could be anemic, or a lot of different things that could contribute. So I think we need to, really make sure we don't forget these various aspects of our being when we're talking about holistic care, because there's a lot that we can do that maybe just kind of the general person that in the population wouldn't think of it being related to mental health, but it really actually is, because any way that we could help a person improve their quality of life, we can help them improve their mental health. And so, we talked a little bit here about physical health or physical needs. What about mental needs, Maddie? That's kind of probably what people think about, but what would we look at in that aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, a lot of people who come in looking for services for therapy, one of the biggest complaints is, I'm not sleeping well, and I want to be more physically active, right? So whether they're not able to do that because of their mental health or some other physical ailment, that's one of the big complaints that we hear in the physical kind of part of a person. And they do connect. If you're extremely depressed, and getting outside and being out in nature and just being somewhat active actually does help with that depression. But if you're just extremely depressed and you can't even get out of bed, it just becomes this vicious cycle of, like, I'm really depressed, I can't get up to take my medicine, I can't get out of bed, so I become more depressed, and then I can't, and then I really don't even want to get up and get moving. And so yeah, if it's not, if we don't work with people from a holistic standpoint, encourage them to really address some of the needs across all four of these areas, treatment may not be as successful. So yeah, it is really important. But the mental wellness is kind of, obviously what people think about when they think about therapy. And there's a lot of different things that you can do to be working on your mental wellness, but managing stressors is like number one. Oftentimes people have very bad coping skills and coping mechanisms, and life is stressful for everyone, regardless of who you are. Things come up, and how you manage that stress is really important. So whether you have an underlying mental health disorder or not, you might find yourself looking for therapy, right? Because you're going, I've got all this stuff happening and I'm not totally sure how to navigate that. So understanding what stress is and how it affects you, because it does also impact your physical wellness, is important in working on the mental health aspect of it. And then figuring out what kind of therapy you're wanting to do. One of the big therapy services and modalities that we offer here is cognitive behavioral therapy. And really what that does is it looks at your emotions and your thoughts and your behaviors, and really kind of hones in on what are the thoughts that might be distressing you that you're having, and how can we work to shift and change those. It as soon as we can work to shift and change some of the distressing thoughts that might be hindering us, then we can really also go, how are these thoughts or how are my emotions or my behaviors impacting those other areas, right? If I've experienced an extreme trauma and the results of that is that I start to question, why did God do this to me, or did God send this to me? Then that's going to start to affect my spiritual well-being, right? And so if we can really start addressing those thoughts and behaviors and emotions in therapy, then you see it, like I said, kind of start to impact in a positive way the other areas, physical, relational, spiritual. If you're not mentally well, if you're upset or agitated or depressed, I mean, yeah, the relationships that you have are going to be impacted, and how you interact. Because if the narrative and the dialogue that's going on in your head is negative or distressing, I mean, that's just going to absolutely show itself in the other areas of your life.
Absolutely. And I think what's important for people to understand is that, you may be taking a medication for your mental health problem, and that medication may be minimizing a symptom, which is what medications do, and doing it in an okay way. But it may be not at the level that you want it to be at. And so if that's the focus, if that's the only focus of your treatment, is to, this symptom has to be minimized more. If that's the breadth of the treatment, so you just go back and they change the dose, they try another medication. That's so narrow. There's so much more that can be done. And one of the things I like about using a very structured approach to where we're looking at multiple aspects of a person when we're treating them or working with them, is that there's always something we can be working on, regardless of whether they have a mental health problem or not. And that's the thing. These are things all of us should be working on, regardless of whether they have a mental health problem or not. We all should be working on our physical wellness. We should all be working on our mental wellness. And we should all be working on our spiritual wellness. They all kind of go together. The spiritual wellness aspect of this really was shown to me in a physical health situation when my father struggled for many, many years before he passed away with very serious heart condition, and ultimately got an artificial heart. And so before, he wasn't going to be able to leave the hospital without it. He was basically on a machine that was keeping his heart pumping, and so they decided to do this. And right before they were going to take him to surgery, a woman came in from the company that manufactured the device, and she said that she was there to do his spiritual assessment, which I just was absolutely fascinated about. And so I sat down right there next to the bed with her, and she asked him 10 questions along the lines of, do you believe in a higher power? Do you think that higher power is involved in healing? The different things like that, mostly in relationship to how is your physical health related to this heart problem? How do you believe that would be related to your spiritual life, to God, things like that? And and so I asked her afterwards, what is that all about? I mean, this is a company that makes a device for money. They're not, looking to try to bring people to the Lord type of thing. So, I mean, she said, well, we actually find that individuals who are people of faith and believe that or connect with God in relationship to their healing, they actually do better with our product than those who don't.
Huh.
And it really brought it home for me because here's a for-profit company who really isn't doing this because they have a spiritual, dog in the hunt kind of thing here. They're just doing this to try to see who does better and how to maximize the efficacy of this device. And they found that if a person is actively involved in a spiritual life, that they do better. And we find the same thing with mental health. Absolutely, the research is clear. Not only is active spiritual life and a deep faith a protective factor, not meaning that it would make you not be able to have a mental health problem, but it is a protective factor. It's also an incredible coping strategy for when you're dealing with stress or with mental health issues. And there's a lot of opportunity there for growth, even in the midst of a mental health problem. And for me, I think kind of the core of that or the foundation of that is the idea of hope. I think, when your client has no hope, uh, movement in a positive direction is very, very difficult. But from a spiritual perspective, we have a real opportunity to build hope because God transcends the circumstances that you're in. God is sovereign and all powerful. He can move you through this. He can empower you in this. He can be with you, present in this. So there's a lot of opportunities to build hope in an individual, that change is possible and that you have a loving God that's on your side. And so there's a lot of opportunities to build hope and value and worth. How does God see me? I may be depressed and not think I have much value, but what is the truth? How does God see me? So there's a lot of opportunities. But like you just said a minute ago, Maddie, they really do kind of go hand in hand with the mental aspects, because if a person is absolutely convinced that they, are a worthless person, it does begin to alter their spiritual life, because they may then. I've had a lot of depressed clients tell me, "Well, I don't feel like I'm that God cares about me enough for me to pray. I don't think God will listen to my prayers." And so you really, at some level, it's almost like you're working on a lot of these at the same time, but maybe not as structured as a way as we're talking. I like the structured approach because I think it helps the client understand that, well, this week we're working on some spiritual things,
Mhm.
whereas last week we worked on a physical thing that you said was your main issue, but that's not your main issue anymore. Now another issue has kind of moved to the top because you've done so well with that other. So, it just all kind of goes together.
Yeah, or if in a few weeks prior we've been talking about cognitive distortions and unhealthy or unhelpful thinking patterns that have occurred, and then we move into the spiritual section of the curriculum that we use here, and you start to hear things like you just mentioned, like God is just sending bad things to me, or God doesn't listen, or I'm angry with God, those sorts of things. Then you can start to say, where did that shift happen? Has that always been your thought process? And you can kind of pinpoint if there was a shift and say, well, what was going on there? Is this when the depression hit, or is this when this life event really kind of rocked your world? And is this really your belief, or is it a symptom of your mental health or your situation? And can we look at this in maybe a more realistic way and in a more truthful way of, like, where do we want to get back to with our spiritual beliefs? And so it's not, you use the spiritual portion of a person as a support when they're in a good place, and that's what it can be used as. But oftentimes we also see people coming in going, I'm not doing well, this is not, like, I've lost hope, I've lost my faith, like I'm
Right,
questioning God's existence. And we say, okay, well, let's talk more about that and see where we can go from there. It's,
right.
so you
I
see it
think,
kind of.
I think unfortunately, a lot of times people, especially with serious mental illness, I've kind of called them the throwaway people. A lot of times they're looked at as like, well, you got a mental health problem, so that's all you need. That's all you need to think about. You need to get
Mhm.
some medicine, and why would you be worried? Don't worry right now about eating well. Don't worry about exercise. Don't worry about your spiritual life. But if you think about it from the other side, if I were to say to somebody, okay, so you've got a mental health problem, whatever that be, would you be better if you had an active and growing spiritual life? Would that make your quality of life better? Would you be would you be better if you were more physically healthy,
Mhm.
regardless of your mental aspect? And so I think when you say it like that, it's so obvious. I mean, who wouldn't be better in any circumstance if they weren't more physically healthy or had a more active spiritual life? I mean, things like that. I mean, so but unfortunately, I think because it can be a taboo topic a lot of times, particularly with the spiritual issues within therapeutic environments. It's just not talked about, and there's so much limited time that you have with clients in a normal setting. Not like here we have a year-long program that people go into. A lot of times they just don't talk about these kind of things, and unfortunately, I just don't think people get the kind of care that they need because they need a more holistic, as we started out, discussion of what's going on with them. I also think I like the structured way that we do it, where we kind of break it apart, because it does allow the person not only to kind of see more clearly and pick out what they see as their primary issue at the moment, but it also allows them not to talk about their spiritual life if they don't want to. And it
Mm.
also allows them not to talk about their relationships if they don't want to, because a time will come where that will come up and they will talk about it, but it doesn't have to be day one if they don't want it to be.
Yeah, we
So,
give them this essentially an agenda of like, here are all these topics we can talk about, and they
right,
can go, this is what's hitting with me this week, and we can kind of hop around and it's tangible. They're holding the curriculum is actually a workbook. So they're holding the workbook and they can see the lesson topics and they can go, oh, okay, living in community. Okay, finding purpose. I've been feeling purposeless this week. Like I want to jump into that. And
right,
yeah, so it really does. We hear oftentimes from our clients that they love that the workbook or curriculum approach, that it's not this kind of abstract, we're sitting and
right,
talking about all these things. It really helps them kind of see and put into perspective what they're doing and the work that they're doing and how it
right.
impacts their whole self.
Right, and they take that home and they have homework and they work. So it's not something that you just work on with somebody 45 minutes a week in an office and then you never think about it again. So you're trying to incorporate these things into your daily life change. And so, the fourth aspect of the self that we look at is relationships or
I think
relational
that's
well-being.
I think that's probably one of the most challenging,
Right,
one of the biggest challenges that our clients struggle with is their relationships, because you can talk about your physical health, you can talk about your spiritual health and your mental health. That's you, right? That's
right.
just you. When you talk about relational health, you're now incorporating other people into the
Someone
mix.
else is involved, right?
And there's so much less control there. And so if you've got an anxious person, control is the solution in their mind to the anxiety. And so, it really becomes this wild card. And so it's, yeah, this interpersonal relationships is really kind of where you see all of these kind of like filter down into.
Right.
And yeah, it's
Well,
really
it's
interesting.
interesting because, with the relationship aspect is, people are going to respond to you in different ways. And so, people have a mental health problem. Sometimes they have a mental health problem that make them relatively aversive to be around.
Mhm.
They even people that have a mental health problem where they don't necessarily become involved in destructive behaviors, like maybe if they're seriously depressed, they're not real fun to be around when they're in a deep depressive episode, because you're not, unless you've ever gone through that level of depression, you really can't connect with them. You really can't empathize. You know what it is to be sad. You don't know what it is to be so depressed that you wished you weren't alive, and so it's hard to connect. So you kind of avoid them and or shun them. And or you could have a disorder like borderline personality disorder, or a substance use problem, or bipolar disorder, where you become involved in impulsive, destructive behaviors, where in essence you destroy all the, I'm laughing, but sometimes it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You just destroy every relationship around you. And it's not so much, I find a lot of times, that they need to try to, as you're going through a person has bipolar disorder and they've been very destructive in their relationships. When you get their bipolar symptoms under control, they're a little less destructive in their relationships. So that kind of takes care of itself. The problem is the fallout,
For
and
sure.
you really see this with people with substance use issues. So I'm 58. So I'm a 58-year-old man that I finally decided after being married to somebody for 30 years, she says she's going to finally leave me unless I finally get help for my alcoholism. And I go and I get sober and I go home and I go, and I know you've heard this 100 times, and I go, okay, everything's good now.
Hey,
I'm
no,
not drinking anymore.
yeah.
But I've got 30
And
years worth of relational damage that I need to work on. And that's when we talk about relational wellness, we're not just talking about like I'm going to give you a skill so when you go meet this new guy tomorrow at work, you're going to be able to interact with him in a better way. I'm talking about conflict resolution. I'm talking about rebuilding relationships that you destroyed over the last 20 years, or that they destroyed over the last 20 years by shunning you and not being involved with you anymore.
one, really understanding what a healthy relationship looks like and setting those boundaries, because
Right.
you can have a mental health issue, you can have a physical health issue, like all of these things that may impact your relationships like you're talking about. But even outside of that, say those ailments didn't exist, if you were raised with poorly modeled relationships,
Absolutely.
or you don't understand how to set healthy boundaries, you don't even understand, you go, there's chaos in my relationships, but I don't know why or where or how
Right.
it's happening. Then it becomes like I don't even know where to start, right? And
Right.
it's really at the core of it is understanding what a healthy relationship looks like.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, look at these topics that we have in our workbook. I mean, there's anyone could benefit from this. Boundaries. How to set up healthy boundaries in your relationships. We all have boundaries in our relationships. Resolving conflict, forgiveness, serving others. How do you give back? Beyond what others think about you. I mean, these are things that really, in some sense, everybody uses every day. But if you have a mental health problem and you've had that mental health problem for quite some time, you frankly may have never learned these, like you said, what a healthy relationship is, or how to use these kind of relational skills, or you may have kind of a bent version of them, where maybe anger is part of the illness that you have, and there is no conflict resolution for you. It's your way or the highway, and you just explode at people and kind of force them to do what you want them to do, kind of verbally, and that's what you've learned to do over time as a result of your illness or modeling or whatever. Well, that's once that's taken care of from a treatment perspective, well, you're left with nothing. You have no relational skill on how to interact. So learning these skills, I think, is just absolutely tremendously important. But also, we see a lot of times people that have had mental health problems and they've really been damaged by others that have
Sure.
mistreated them horribly. And forgiveness is an important, and obviously that's a very spiritual topic, but it's also a relational topic. I mean, in our context, we're going to talk about that from a spiritual perspective, but which is going to give a lot more grounding to that. But understanding how to forgive people and to move forward, and that forgiving someone doesn't mean that it didn't hurt, and it doesn't mean that you're giving them permission to do that again, but you're allowing yourself to be disconnected from that and to move forward and not be trapped by it. And so there's a lot of great things to do in the context of relationships, but I really think it is interesting how people, I'm sure you give an example of this, how people really either don't think about that as something to be part of kind of a holistic approach to being well, or they avoid it. They don't really want to go there because it can be one of the most painful aspects.
Yeah, I think if you ask like the average person on the street, like explain to me what you think wellness is. They're going to hit physical, they're going to hit the mental, they might bring up the spiritual, right? I don't think most people are going to say relationships. That's something that I
Right.
consider as part of like my holistic wellness, because we think of wellness as like just ourselves and it's very like isolated to just us, but really we're built for relationships, right?
Right.
If we
Absolutely.
before. And so yeah,
And we
they're
don't do
all
well without them.
mm-mm,
That
no.
causes its own mental health problems. One of the things you said something earlier that made me think. I mean, when in the mental needs that we work with people, a lot of times people with mental health problems, and even people without, they frankly cannot identify emotions effectively. Like they
Uh-oh.
don't know what their own emotions are. Like they don't know that they're mad, and they don't
Right.
know when they're sad. And if you think about a person that really doesn't know how to differentiate emotions, how are they going to form a healthy relationship? And
Well, or they
so,
can,
it just
yeah,
kind of all goes together.
they can categorize like large, broad emotions like sad or like angry or happy. But really that doesn't give you enough depth into emotion to really connect meaningfully with other people, because sadness can look like 1,000 different things. And so if you're going, oh, you're sad, like I'm going to give you a hug, but if the sadness is for a different reason, that connection is going to be harder, which yeah,
One of the things that we do when we do assessments, we're trying to figure out what's going on with the person. Is we ask them, well, this problem you've come in with about to talk about today, how's it affecting your daily life? Is it affecting you at work? Is it affecting you in school? Is it affecting you in your relationships? And so, and then we very much, like, if they said, oh, well, yeah, my relationships are destroyed. I mean, everybody's left me, my wife won't talk to me because of all this. Well, I mean, that's a key measure of the intensity and the severity of what's going on. But it's kind of interesting. Oftentimes that's the last time you ever talk about relationships.
right.
And I just find that so odd. That's just so odd. Why would you just leave that? It's like leaving a crater, just kind of saying, okay, well, just
I
kind of
think
live around the crater.
it's hard to look at that and say, like, I've got to acknowledge my part in that. And it's easier to say, if my physical wellness is not good, like if I don't have good physical health, it's
Right.
nobody's fault but my own. And
Right,
it's
right. And if I don't fix it, it's okay because I'm the
right,
only one that is affected by
right.
it.
But just in the relational realm, you can say like, all of my relationships are terrible because I just pick bad people to be in
Right,
relationships with, but it's their fault. And you go, well, what's going on that you're picking bad people?
right.
And they're like, well, I don't know. They're just attracted to me. It's not my issue. And so it's easier to kind of like shove away. But ultimately, oftentimes we get to that and people go, okay, yeah, maybe I'm struggling with this, that, or the other, but they don't even know what a boundary is. So how do they know that they're not setting them, or that they're
Right. No, absolutely. If you don't know what boundaries are, you certainly don't know if you've got them or whatever.
yeah.
Well, good. Well, this is a great talk today. Thanks, Maddie, for going through that with me. I really just think it's a it's not an uncommon way that people look at mental health issues. I just think it's uncommon to find it being used in a very structured way uh, across clients. I think if you're out there today and you have a mental health problem, or you've received treatment, or you're looking for treatment, you might talk about this to your therapist and see how they see that. What about my physical health? How does that work into this? What about my relational issues? Will we be talking about those types of things? So again, if you're interested in learning more about the Hope and Healing Center, we will have our website in the description of this podcast, as well as an email that you can contact us at if you have questions or comments. And please join us next time on the Madness and Grace podcast.
Thanks for being here, everyone.